Hi, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion of the various campaign settings of Dungeons & Dragons, that most of which originated in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. We're continuing with Spelljammer as we left off last time. This time I'm introducing you to the races of Spelljammer. Let's talk about major and minor races, because this is a big distinction between the different races that doesn't have a huge in-game effect. At most of the time, a major race has more bragging rights, that they, oh, we're important out here. At most, they're looking down on some of the minor races. Now, the major races are humans, mind flayers, beholders, dwarves, elves, and Neogi. The minor races are halflings, gifts, centaurs, kenders, giants, and dragons. Now, there are a few kind of exceptions. For example, orcs used to be a major race, but now are more considered minor after the previous war, which decimated them. Gnomes are considered minor even though they're out there just because of their strange nature, and it just seems like most of the time whatever they're building is going to fall apart at a moment's notice. So they're really not considered major because of this. Arcane are considered major because they are this source of spell jamming helms, that they very easily seem to produce them. Granted, no actual colonies of them have been seen, and they have this mysterious origin, and there aren't many of them, it appears. So it's really hard to say where they're from. That's one of those things that seems to be a major difference also. People that are of a major race have a large population of space, they have big colonies, bases, a lot of ships representing them. They have people there. Now let's talk about humans, because they are the most numerous in space. That's one of those things, is humans manage to be the most numerous wherever they seem to go. Once again, like many of the worlds, they are. Now, humans, only about 10% of them are actually aligned with any kind of group or anything. The most of them are just sort of free spirits that travel about and have their own way of doing things. Maybe they form small colonies, maybe they form large colonies, maybe they settle asteroids, but they don't seem to have a major, alliance or allegiance to a larger group on a whole very often, if they have any. Now, after that, the remaining 10% does belong to the various allegiance, kingdoms, things that are forming in space. So there are human-based kingdoms, just not a lot of them. Now, humans have brought a lot of religions too, just like many of the races do. They have, of course, their normal pantheons that you might find in plenty of the other different spheres, and their own sort of groupings of deities. But there is also the followers of Ptah, which are these group of religious zealots almost that believed that Ptah is the one true deity and the one powerhouse. When they see other pantheons, they always look to the leader of the pantheon and believe that would be Ptah. And that is what it is that Ptah is the leader of all deities, and effectively all the minor ones out there just don't really matter. Unfortunately, the way they act rubs a lot of people the wrong way, so they're pretty disliked wherever they go, but they are out there, and there's enough of them that you might run into them when you're out there. Now, there are some groupings of humans that are beyond kingdoms. There's military companies and trading organizations. There are a number of them, which I won't go into details about all of them. The book lists a good selection of them. But they are the main powerhouses of humanity out there. The military organizations are more like mercenaries for protecting groups, things like that they don't technically have an allegiance. They have allegiance to themselves. Similar, many of the trading companies don't have a specific country, but they function on large scales of space in different spheres, and that is what allows them to have these autonomy and power that almost sometimes rivals a kingdom. There are still schools of magic and rogue galleries too. They're kind of collections of people that really don't get together the same way. They're more like meeting up briefly. They aren't like a group that has organization. So they're kind of very flexible. A school of magic will just be when people need to learn, discuss some things. Occasionally they'll meet together and then spread out again. It's not like it's well organized. Same with the rogues gallery, where bards or thieves might get together in order to sort of discuss things as necessary and kind of work with their organizations. Now, there are also adventuring guilds that do exist. This is really more of a leftover from ground-based travel and travelers. It's not as much of a call for it, and these tend to be very small, kind of plastic. They're kind of stretchable and exist in a malleable form that doesn't really form the same kind of power as any of the other human organizations out there. Granted, again, for all of these, humans end up being sort of a glue for many of the other races in space, because they can pretty much get along with everybody, and they form these kind of organizations which don't really have alliances that can fit in plenty of other locations, and because of that, they just sort of meld into all the cracks that exist. Now let's move on from humans and talk about elves, and specifically the elven armada. Now, elves have this very powerful military-based organization that exists within space. They see themselves as the connection between the various groundling elves and all the spheres. So they look at themselves as being sort of overlords of all of them, but not quite the same. They look at themselves as being the connecting glue between all elves in the universe. They oftentimes reflect military conflict based on that. They have contact with a lot of major elven cities and spheres. Anything that would be considered like a metropolis for elves, they have contact with and communications with them. They actually see the sovereignty of many elf royalty as being important to them, and they listen to that sovereignty. They will actually come to their aid as long as it seems like it's not directly ground-based politics. They do have this sort of fine line of when they would interfere and when they won't. They don't want to interfere with something that is definitely ground-based politics, but they don't want to see their groundling cousins be destroyed because they are part of the elven family. Now, they have, of course, done a number of military exercises because they are based around the military of their ships. They have fleets. They are led by admirals and a council of admirals. There's a high admiral that is in front of all of them, that this council meets together in a secret base known as Lionheart, somewhere in the universe that no one knows about, where they discuss all the elven mechanics that they're doing. Elves have been known to do great wars. They had the Unhuman War, which they waged against mainly orcs, which is why one of the reasons orcs have been pretty much purged from space and there are very few left in it, was because of this. The thing is, it took them a long time, perhaps even human lifetimes, centuries to discuss and decide what their actions they're going to take. Elves take a long time to talk about these. The council are elves that are old even for elven standards, as long as they've been there. The Council of Admirals. They're ancient. And of course, they've been discussing the Nyogi threat as of current, but may take quite a while before they decide to act on that. Now, their ships can be, of course, as I said, found in fleets, but they also will go off and explore or patrol a sector on their own. Unfortunately, communications between elven ships tends to be pretty terrible, so should one or two go missing, they usually count it to something going on, normal everyday activity. They just sort of discount it, which may or may not be great in the long run. But most of the time, most ships will check back at a major capital or base at some point during the course of a year just to sort of check in about what's going on. Maybe trade and get more supplies, such. Now, they have sort of formed themselves the idea that they are guardians of the sphere, especially after their victory over the orcs. They feel themselves very superior and a position of military might, though they might not actually be. They are, though, willing to mobilize to help out friendly nations in space as it's necessary, and they believe it's their duty to sort of protect the order about what's going on. Now, they do maintain embassies in most human settlements or human cities, anything like that. They try to keep basic embassies wherever they can so they have their influence, especially since human culture is so widespread. It's very easy to establish them in these places and connects with a lot of the other races. Now, they do form bases and sort of colonies in space. What they will do is they will sort of create a ring of their armada ships, and their armada ships look like giant butterflies, and the old ones which are no longer in use, and create this kind of ring of butterflies in which they can use their gravitational planes together to sort of form this flat space that they can then put things like gardens, farms, things like that they could expand and exist out in space. Now, most elven subraces exist out in space, but there are two that find themselves very little, if any, influence in space. The first is Drow. They have an underground life. They often have connections to outer planes beings, so they oftentimes more worry about player travel rather than space travel. Though there are sort of rumors that dark in the shadows, there are some Drow ships out there. Hard to say if it's actually true. Now, the other race is aquatic elves, or sea elves. They need water to survive. They would have to build ships that hybridize both between some water areas and some air areas to really function properly. The unfortunate thing about that is that it makes it difficult for them to get any ships. That doesn't mean there aren't any aquatic elves out in space. It's just there aren't a lot, and they're almost more of a fledgling race at it, rather than the majority of elves which have already established themselves, even among all the other subtypes. So that's it for today. I talked about the differences between major and minor races and mentioned a bunch of them. I talked about humans and then elves and gave you some information about their societies in space. In the next episode, I'll go over some more races that are out in space and let you know about them. You can understand a little bit more about how their societies works too. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show additional support, please check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. But until the next time, I bid you farewell.